Chapter 241 Insanity. Austin. Austin stood and eyed the hunk of ice next to him. The nip in the air forced him to circulate more mana through his body to ward it away, but it wasn't anything he hadn't done before. After so long, the frigid air and chilly, tingling sensation were normal conditions rather than hazardous. There was a change, however, in something else, and it wasn't readily apparent someone looking in from the outside. It took Austin a while to notice it because his eyes had been preoccupied with the fighting, but now that he wasn't distracted, he noticed it immediately. "You got lifts in that ice or something? It feels like I'm breaking my neck over here." Austin poked as his gaze was forced up a few degrees. Christopher's face wasn't clearly visible under the ice, but the glowing dots of blue were easy to make out. They pierced through the thin layer, trying to conceal them like it was glass. And what they held was confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Look, buddy. It's okay if you're insecure standing next to me. I can get you a box next time. You don't have to use lifts in your ice," Austin said, gesturing at their now much more apparent height difference. Chris looked even more shocked. "I don't know what drugs you're on, but I've always been taller than you." Austin laughed. "Yeah, okay. And Abigail isn't always controlling." "Wait," Chris said. "You actually think you're taller than me?" Austin sighed. "I don't just think I'm taller than you. I know I'm taller than you." Trees creaking and snapping caused both of them to look away, but they soon turned back to each other after seeing the boss wasn't that much closer. It only sounded that way by the ruckus it was causing stomping through the woods. "I don't think now's the time for this," Chris said. While Austin didn't want to give it up, he did because Christopher was right. Now really wasn't the time for this. Even if there was a change Austin wished to figure out. In general, they were both the same height. Both Chris and he measured in at the 6'1" mark. It had been a childhood argument about who was taller for as long as Austin could remember. Growth spurts, markings on a family doorframe. Breaking out the measuring tape when the argument got brought up. The fact Chris was now a few inches taller annoyed him. Yes, the glaring, extremely noticeable difference was by only a few inches. So small that no one would notice. No one except for Austin, which only made it worse. If he went complaining, it would just point it out for people to pick up on. "This isn't over, I'll get to the bottom of it. Just wait till I get my wings. I won't be the one looking up then." Ice creaked and snow crunched as Chris made toward the boss, but Austin put his hand up to stop him. "Wait a sec. I want to try something," Austin said. They hadn't discussed how they were going to fight the boss, but Austin wanted to test something before Chris went all smashy. He knew it probably wouldn't work, but it was a rare chance he didn't want to pass up. Kai set his hammer back down with a thud and waved him forward. "Be my guest." Austin had seen Chris's many displays of power. There were quite a few he could point to in recent memory, and he wanted to try the same. He'd grown a lot, and now was the time to prove it. Prove it to Chris. Prove it to his family. But most of all, prove it to himself. The sun was high, waning but still near enough to its apex. So sunshine was still giving him strength. His skills were still running hot as well. Burning light still flared brightly, and sunburst was still available to be used. Walking in front of the big lug, Eclipse started draining his strength. The fact he wasn't in a frantic fight for survival made the use of the skill much easier, and he had to praise the fact that his range could accommodate being so far away. He took off in a slow jog that slowly ramped up, fighting through the sluggishness the whole way as he prepared the other skills he was about to use. While he wouldn't match up to Chris skill for skill, he could simulate what the big guy could do with a combination of skills. Similar to how light and fire were intertwined in combination, skills could be used the same. Usually, only one or two could be used at the same time on the same weapon. If too many were layered on top of each other, they would interfere with each other. One skill to boost the body and another to boost his spear were different. Nothing in the skills overlapped, which made their use a matter of mental application and mana availability. It was when layering skills on top of one another that problems arose, but Austin spent a significant amount of time melding and layering skills onto his spear that he could do more than two, unlike Chris. While that wasn't entirely fair to Chris as he only had two weapon skills, but Austin would take the small win it was. Solar Extension. His rare skill that he built up from common started as the generic weapon skill, Extended Strike. What used to only be a mana projection that extended the reach of his spear, turned into rays of searing light that extended out of his spear, not unsimilar to his other skill, Solar Ray. Austin later picked up the common skill Piercing Strike back when he was first an H-rank warrior, making it a second but similar weapon skill that applied to his spear. He'd only managed to upgrade that one to uncommon, turning it into Piercing Light. Penetrating Strike was a lucky find from a skill shard during his travel down south, which he added to his repertoire happily. He'd skipped over picking it when offered, and the new skills presented were a much better option than going back and picking it up. Last, but not least, the signature skill of his old class, Spear of the Morning. All of them rolled together, layered onto his spear, caused the metal tip to shine radiantly like a second dawn. The metal used to create the weapon drank in his mana with glee. His pace sped up and he could feel Eclipse coming to an end, and the power that it would give about to burst through him. The dam was slowly crumbling and the rush was coming. He readied his grip, making sure that his spear was in position. His mana continued to flow, taking a considerable chunk out of how much he had left. His feet began to feel lighter and the constraints on him lessened as he fed his spirit into the attack. Both his laws were consumed in equal measure, fire and light combining into something greater. Now that he was close enough and the time was right, his now sprint came to an end as he abruptly stopped. Set my feet, rotate the hips, drive the spear forward, and unleash the sun. Chris. Watching Austin jog toward the boss was only slightly confusing. I'd assumed we'd fight it together, but Austin was off trying something. I was confused at first, but I wasn't anymore. I felt the buildup of power, not only in the mana he started to use and control but in his aura as well. It spiked and smothered the area before beginning to slowly wane. The steady drop continued, but for some reason, the slight danger feeling it held only grew. The glow from his spear transitioned onto his whole body as he called on his new anchor, turning him into a bright ball of light for a brief second before my vision was whited out by something else. Almost without any warning, the steady drop in his aura ended and it exploded out, well past where it once stopped. Everything that was drained away gradually came rushing back faster than before, turning my vision white from the intense luminescence. All my snow in the area was flash melted, causing a slight amount of discomfort as I was still connected to it. I had to blink my eyes a few times to force them back to normal, and what I saw astounded me. Smoke rose off him as Austin stood poised like a Greek soldier of old, stabbing his spear forward in a powerful thrust that hit nothing but air. While his physical spear hit nothing, that was far from being the case. The searing light that blinded me was the true attack. Turning to the boss unveiled the damage Austin's attack caused. A gaping hole was seared through the boss that extended well into its meaty insides. Not enough to burn clear through, but enough to cause obvious damage. The fur around the wound was blackened, if not burned off completely, and blood gushed from the new hole in its torso. The attack happened so fast that the boss only now roared out in pain. The light closed the distance so quickly that its response felt delayed in comparison. Austin's breath came in giant huffs, as he forced his lungs to work overtime. The boss continued its march toward us, wound mostly forgotten, and it thundered on. Damn! Huff that barely did anything, and it was all I had. Austin huffed. I said nothing and only looked at the wolf bear, as the system had called it. Matching Austin's enthusiasm, I marched ahead and readied my own attack. Permafrost and blizzard were still active, but the chill did nothing to slow or hinder the boss. Instead, I readied Shattering Hammer. Ice groaned and my hammer shifted, quicker than before, and I ran ahead to swing away. Being much slower than the previous attack, and with the boss already alerted and angry, it reacted in time to meet my swing, but that was fine with me. It would land either way. My steps halted and I brought my hammer around swiftly. Shattering Hammer exploded out, sending its energies raging through the boss, and I expected blood and gore to go flying from the limb exploding. The forelimb the boss used to attack took in my swing, and did nothing. I could feel the raging energy of my skill coursing through it, but all it caused was another roar of pain similar to the one Austin elicited. Ha! I wasn't the only one. Austin's voice carried from behind me. It was a first for me. Avalanche full, bloodline burning bright, glacial presence, nearing its peak, my laws and anchor empowering me. And it wasn't enough. What's this thing made of? Partly because of confusion, other part because of being distracted and overconfident, I wasn't ready for a counterattack and only saw the limb swinging my way too late. Jotun's resistance flared as I poured mana into it, and I could only brace slightly before an impact shook me to the core, knocking me off my feet and sending me rolling through the snow back to where Austin stood. My bones felt rattled and I was shaken up, but nothing felt broken, and a quick flare of frozen patchwork that didn't do anything left me no worse off than before. Using my hammer to stand, I looked at Austin and smirked. Maybe we should go together. Yeah. He was still slightly bewildered. Yeah, that works for me. Like usual? Right behind you. Righteous fury burned through me as it was one of the last cards I had left to play. Everything else was already out, and it seemed like this was going to be a slow and brutal slugfest. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going down easily. Miles. Insane. Certifiably and completely insane. Miles had wondered what it took for an entire family to be considered powerhouses, and he now knew the reason. Insanity was the trick. A breaking of the mind that lent itself to further power. Nothing else explained it. The first case for that being so was the man swinging a giant hammer at something 100 times bigger than him, not to mention stronger. Everyone had watched him get launched away after being hit, then everyone continued to watch as he got up and did the same exact thing, running back like the hit was nothing. Miles had wondered if he'd imagined the booming thud of the hit at first. By the way, nothing had changed. Other than that, the fact he was even down there in the first place was Exhibit A. Miles knew he was the one that built the wall and poured hours into its construction and enchanting. The man built one of the biggest and strongest walls Miles had ever seen, yet he disregarded to use it and fought down below in the plains in front. Not only did he do it, but he encouraged others to do it too, following in his footsteps. Nearly 100 people bought into the lunacy and fought like brutal savages, and all Miles could do was watch on in utter bafflement. Some of them even died. You'd think that would be the end of it, but it was only the start. The mayor, the sister of the city lord, was just the same as he was. Miles was far enough away from the gate to get a clear picture of what was happening while being close enough to make out the details. Streams of water formed into giant whips that cut down anything and everything that neared the gate. What the whips couldn't kill was instead cut apart or diced into pieces from jets of water so strong they cut into the earth, sending rocks everywhere. Other than the bisected bodies being left behind, giant cuts were left into the ground dozens of feet deep. While the water show was overshadowed by what was happening out in front, there were so many other things Miles could point out it was all too overwhelming. Stone rose from the ground and cordoned off entire sections of the wall by someone wielding 2 shields. Not one, but 2. He wasn't even using a weapon. Metal flowed, changing form and shape as a man sprinted up and down the wall, ensuring no section was undermanned. Crescents of razor-sharp wind and powerful streams of sharp icicles. Jets of intense flame. Everything was too much. Arrows, magic, weapons, skills. All of it was insanity. These people could march on the petty elites that ruled Toronto like they were nothing. Roll in, stomp them underfoot, and take whatever they wanted, and there would be nothing anyone could do about it. Miles peered out over the ramparts at the duo going blow for blow with something that would kill everything where he came from, and couldn't help but rethink his life choices. At least the man had a code, and Miles prayed to every deity that he knew of that he held to it. He didn't want to see what could happen if he didn't. Chapter 242, Unbowed. Chris. A sharp groan escaped my lips as the boss hammered down on me for what felt like the millionth time. With me playing the tank, all of its attacks were generally aimed my way. Austin got to flit around, stabbing out when the opportunity arose with nothing to hinder him. The boss would occasionally turn to face him instead of me, but a well-placed, shattering hammer or frozen rift made it focus back on me. Shattering hammer was doing more internal damage than first assumed. It was just taking longer to surface. Usually, the skill ripped and shredded anything in its way, but this thing was handling the skill much better than anything else I'd used it on. Frozen rift had to be used unconventionally. The spikes and pillars it could form worked, but they weren't what worked best. From the extensive fighting, I found a few other uses for it that worked better. Taking inspiration from Gabriel's skill, spreading ice. I had the skill turn into a debilitating encasement rather than an attack. Wherever the hit landed, thick sheets of ice extended out in every direction seeking to encase the entire creature. It usually flailed around and retaliated before too much could be covered in ice, but enough that the limb or area I hit was firmly covered and its movement impaired. Austin would waylay the beast for a few moments following, and before the thing could break out of it or break the ice off, shatter sent it imploding into its skin. A subtle but powerful side effect to using Frozen Rift like that was it pervaded the area in Arctic mana. It was similar to a much more effective and damaging, pervading cold. Every subsequent hit in the same area was more powerful and spread further than before, building on the mana that was already there rather than having to start anew. That was until Austin came along and burned it. Took some trial and error to get used to fighting together again. We both had new skills and fighting styles to get used to that neither of us had before, and there was a learning curve to get over. Both of us used a lot more mana now, which turned the elemental effects much more destructive and widespread, which then caused our opposing elements to clash. If I hit an area with Arctic mana and he then doused the area with his solar skills, the entire exchange would be a wash. It took him using a few skills in order to overcome my mana when I used Frozen Rift. But no one was keeping track of that. No one at all. Look out! Speed wasn't my strong suit and I'd learned not to try. So instead, mana flooded into Jotun's resistance, and I flexed the ice around my feet. The blow landed solidly, cracking frost armor to pieces before stopping when it came to my skin. It hurt. The force behind the swing didn't stop at cracking my armor or denting the metal that was under it, but it wasn't enough to send me flying like before. I smiled through the pain and coppery taste in my mouth, as this was the first time I hadn't gone flying. Knowing it wasn't Austin's voice that called out, as he had seen me get hit dozens of times by now and wouldn't waste the energy, I turned to see Jonathan running up to us clad in a thick layer of stone. "You're not supposed to be here, Jonathan," I called. He was responsible for making sure the wall wasn't overrun. "The wall is fine. You guys need more help than they do," he called back. Indecision warred in my mind. The boss was strong and I wasn't sure if Jonathan would be able to tank it. It took a considerable effort on my part to not get crushed, and I knew he wasn't as strong. My thoughts didn't deter him as he came in swinging. His two shields weren't that effective for attacking, but they were big heavy metal slabs. Swing them hard enough and they'll cause damage. The added spikes on the leading edge helped. In addition, he had constructions of rock that he was swinging. A rod of earth he held and slammed down on the boss's head. The rod broke into 1,000 pieces, but it got the beast's attention. His combinations of attacks were too much to ignore for the beast, and it turned away from me and to the stony man. I hope he knows what he's doing. Left free, my hammer came around and I slammed it down in rapid succession on its knee. Mighty blow, and pervading cold augmented the blows to be more powerful, but it still wasn't enough to cripple the joint. The sounds of rock shattering and chunks of earth impacting the ground were hard to ignore as I pictured what was happening on the other side. A quick look showed multiple rows of raised earthen shields blown through, but the man behind them was still up and moving. His shields slammed together and a riot of clanging sounds exploded out, keeping the boss from turning away. The tug was only slight on me and easily powered through as Jonathan's taunting skill went to work. Without having to tank anymore and trusting the man to hold up, I went to work with abandon. Austin too, as both hammer and spear slammed home repeatedly. The damage was small, but it added up. Our thinly maintained balance continued until it was tipped further in our direction. Jets of high-pressurized water cut in from afar and long extended whips cracked home. Abigail had joined the fray from the back line. Her hair swam in the air and turned a soft tint of blue as she burned her bloodline the same as everyone else. Mine was running on fumes, and I assumed Austin's was as well. Jonathan seemed to still be going strong as his skin still had a rocky exterior to it. A thin turtle shell covered his body and protected him from the worst of the harm. The water caused superficial damage, and some of the spray froze as my skills were still working to plunge the area into winter. I wished to yell and tell her to back off, but I knew she wouldn't listen. "Follow my lead," She yelled over the sound of battle. Not sure what she was getting at, I continued pounding away with my hammer, trying to conserve what was left of my mana and energy. My anchor was still flooding into me, and my laws were still good, along with my mana. My heart pumped the arcane through my blood and didn't seem to be petering out anytime soon. It was my stamina that was lacking. Each swing of my hammer came slower. Each use of shattering hammer staggered me further. Abigail launched an assortment of skills at the beast with only slightly more effectiveness than the first time, and I was still confused as to what she was getting at. The water cut and pummeled the boss, but it was little better than nothing. Chris, freeze it. Seeing no reason not to, I opened up my stance and reached back to gain more momentum. Mana ran down my hammer and the runes for Frozen Rift came to life. The hit stopped a few feet before impact, and my intent forced another new use out of the skill. It said the rift was connected to the lands of endless winter. Winter was more than just ice, and I pulled with both my laws to get the effect I wanted. The face of my hammer as the source, it was like a giant bellows forced wintry air through the connection. The frigid air howled as it escaped consignment, seeking to pervade what wasn't already cold and desolate. It blew over with minimal damage to the beast, but all water in the area flash froze in a mere moment. With my task completed, the wind died down and the skill cut off before all of my mana was ripped out to keep the connection open. Austin, melt it. Austin did the same as me. He took her cue and did what he could to see it true. His light turned a shade of red instead of its usual blinding white, and his spear shot out in quick succession. The shafts of red left searing wounds, but it was still only skin deep. With the water frozen and melted, it was returned to its liquid state, and another round of pressurized jets slammed home. Again! Took me a disappointing amount of time to figure out her plan. Her attacks cut grooves through the skin and left water deep inside the wound. Freezing it caused it to expand, and not only did the water freeze, but some of the fluids inside the open wound as well. Austin melted it back to liquid, which Abigail then used to force it deeper into the beast with pressurized streams, only for the process to repeat. Every cycle saw the wounds grow and deepen. Blood poured out only to be reused and refrozen. All the while Jonathan frantically threw up earthen shields and taunting roars. Not long after, boulders began raining down as the weapons lining the walls zeroed in on their target. Others from the wall launched attacks as they were freed up to do so, the most notable of which were powerful arrows of rotating wind that drilled into the beast. The scales turned from a tilt into a heavy slant, and there was no coming back for it now. It was only a matter of time. The battle was long. I knew the upgrade would be difficult, but this took the cake on difficult. I doubted many had reached this stage, and I knew some probably died to it. If one wasn't prepared, I shivered at the thought. The thought of some arrogant dick picking the upgrade for pride only to get his entire city killed. A boss, similar to the one I was fighting now, would go rampaging through rank upon rank of people. It was a somber thought because I knew that a scene like that was more than just likely but certain. If not now, then eventually. I fancied myself a powerful man, one near the highest of those around us, and I would not have been able to beat the boss alone. I would have run out of steam before the finishing blow. This upgrade was more than just physical power. It was a test of what I had built and we had passed. Abigail's core made her a force to be reckoned with. Jonathan's resilience stood tall and unyielding. Austin's spear was powerful and remained unbowed. The pillars of what I had built were sturdy, stout and strong. It made me proud. Proud that it wasn't all upon my shoulders. That I could die and things would be okay. The thoughts were enough to bring a tear to my eye if it hadn't frozen first. The boss was sluggish now. Blood loss and volley after volley of attacks had taken its toll. Austin's many stabs had whittled it down, and now it was time to end it. Abigail's plan had opened up its unprotected insides, and the wound had grown wide enough for a well-placed attack to penetrate through, and I knew just the way. Flipping my hammer around, as the spike would be more useful for what I had in mind, I prepared my mana. I didn't need anything fancy this time with Frozen Rift. All I needed was for a spike to reach deep enough to hit something valuable. My swing ripped through the air as over 2,000 points of strength propelled it forward, and my mana precipitously dropped as the lake of what was left vanished. The glistening spike of ice pierced through blood, muscles, and whatever else was in its path before shooting out the other side, dripping with blood. A deep red that froze along the length of the spike. The notification came shortly after, along with a cheer that could be heard from the wall. A rush of essence accompanied the victory, and another notification I hadn't expected so soon. Another skill was available to be chosen, and I knew just the one. Chapter 243, Frozen Leech. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, E, human asterisk. Class, E, Hammer of the Jotner, Legendary. Level 91. Profession, E, Runesmith. Rare, Level 84. Affinity, Arctic. Faction, Frostheim, Leader. Title, Baron. Strength, 1,615. Agility, 793. Perception, 478. Fortitude, 1,180. Endurance, 959. Vitality, 597. Intelligence, 415. Wisdom, 667. Acumen, 406. Free points, 0. Laws, Law of Ice, Tier 2. Law of Wind, Tier 1. Body Stage, Body of Wood, Northern Wind Body. Mana Stage, Ignited Mana Heart Perfect, Stars of Primordial Frost. Spirit Stage, Anchor Formation. A look at my status showed the immeasurable changes that had taken place since winter. Not only 1 but 2 new lines were added, which was a lot considering the previous amount of added lines could be counted on one hand. It took getting measured from a mana device Gabriel devised to find out the rating behind my ignition, but I had a feeling about what grade it was even before being tested. The changes were just too substantial to be anything under perfect. A full ignition was a monumental achievement and something to be proud of, but the fact I perfected mine gave me a great deal of pride. Having my third stat about to reach the 1,000 mark was another thing to be proud of. Endurance was only 41 points away after sinking all of my free points into it. After my ignition and the immense changes to my mana pool, endurance was the weakest link, and it was the drain of all my available free points currently. It would probably continue to be so until my new class and profession changed up the ratios. Looking over everything pointed out that I didn't have that much more to do before evolving. My bloodline was nearing its peak for what my body could handle. Any further and I'd risk internal damage by calling upon it. My body could use an upgrade. Reaching Body of Stone would help matters with my lacking endurance. It wouldn't give me any more stamina to use, but the improvements to my body would let me do more with less, letting me stretch what I had a little bit further. The building to do it in was already built, as Vincent had worked through the winter with Braden to make it happen. I was not looking forward to the pain, but if I made fun of Austin for putting it off, I couldn't show hesitation or the vulture would pounce on it, especially while he was here. The next level of mana cultivation was well out of reach, and it wasn't something I could aim for. It required more mana than I had, and I only just started exploring the current changes. Any advancement to my laws was glacially slow, my ice law specifically. I could feel wind was close to Tier 2, but there was something missing. Lastly, my anchor was growing nicely. The amount of spirit I could use during fights was orders of magnitude larger than when I first formed it. I was lucky I formed it when I did, as Austin was still running out relatively quickly. Jonathan and I could use it for extended periods of time by now. The next stages for that were still a bit of a mystery, but it would be a long time before I was ready for that. All of that being said, the list I still had to do before evolving had shortened dramatically after my expedition north. 1. Upgrade my wind law to Tier 2. 2. Upgrade my body to stone. 3. Expand and purify my bloodline to its maximum. Only 3 remained, and 2 of those were close to completion, with the last only requiring me to set the time aside. And gathering the essence to level up, obviously. The new skill choice at level 90 was one easily filled. The selection had the same choices as before with a few extra, but none of the new ones were better than the one I had in mind. My choice was for a few reasons. Initially, when I was choosing my last skill, Frozen Leech, Icy Connection, and Jotun Armor were the 3 I passed over to choose Frozen Rift. All three had their advantages and disadvantages, but I picked Frozen Rift for reasons the others couldn't provide. I hadn't had the chance to explore the depths of the Rift connection as much as I wished, but it was something I'd do soon. Austin's return helped me decide which I would choose next. We had sparred a few times, neither of us going all out, but it was a new experience and explored something I hadn't come across yet. Speed. His speed, increased from his anchor, was an exercise in futility to try and hit. Speed wasn't something I'd had to fight against before. Most of my enemies were usually running at me, not running away. Plus, most things I fought weren't smart enough to use their faster movement against me. The dungeons had creatures faster than me, and those were a hassle to fight, but the environment was their downfall. Being trapped in a confined room gave me the advantage required to win. Fighting Austin in an open field was impossible. My hammer was fast as 1,500 points in strength could swing, but it still wasn't enough to catch the slippery bastard. He couldn't do anything to me either, but it was annoying to not be able to hit him. My domain skills were the only things that worked, but they weren't enough to defeat him outright, as he had laws and tricks of his own. While his attack on the boss was strong and gave me a feeling of danger, I was confident that using Frost Armor and Jotun's Resistance would be enough. It was enough for the boss's attacks. That was the second reason. Being able to tank the attacks of something so much stronger than me without noticeable injury eliminated Jotun armor from contention. My defense was already powerful enough. I didn't need another skill oriented that way, as that would be massive overkill. Given enough time, I assumed I could turn Frost Armor into Jotun armor by upgrading it manually, but there was one aspect of the skill that kept me from dismissing it outright. Can break down and consume mana that comes into contact with it that isn't cold aligned. That line of the description was what stopped me. I could strengthen, expand, and condense the ice, mix things regarding its formation, and play with all the variables I could to upgrade the skill, but I had no idea where to start when it came to that. The full skill description held some hints, but that didn't help. Jotun Armor, Legendary. Clad your body in the most formidable of icy armor. Created from ice directly tied to the lands of Niflheim, it holds trace amounts of its magic. Able to hold up to even the most powerful of blows and can break down and consume mana that comes into contact with it that isn't cold aligned. The dispelling effect, as I dubbed it, was something I wasn't confident in replicating. I had no past experience to call on, and it was a completely new aspect of ice. My hunch was that created from ice directly tied to the lands of Niflheim was the reason behind it, but I had no way to confirm. With Jotun armor out of contention, that left Frozen Leech and Icy Connection. What sealed the deal was a conversation I had with Austin after a particularly interesting spar. How come you never used the negative aspects of ice? Austin asked while wiping sweat off his face after stabbing his spear into the ground. What do you mean? I asked curiously, letting the ice under my control fall still. Well, you kind of use ice only as a material, if that makes sense. Fighting you and fighting Jonathan are remarkably similar. He uses a lot more shields and defensive constructs, but the principle is the same. His question made me stop and think. I used ice as armor and my weapon. I also turned snow into miniature knives, but there was one thing he was forgetting. What about the cold? I've used that to great effect using Blizzard. I defended. The plunging temperatures were debilitating in their own right. Oh, sorry, you use one aspect other than its physical properties. Congratulations. He snarked condescendingly. I'm talking about the more mystical aspects, like in games and stories. Now you're starting to sound like Gabriel. Oh, hush. I'm serious. He said, you focus so much on one side of things you're forgetting the arcane and mystical just because you can't see it. Okay, great fountain of knowledge, what about you? I don't see you pulling some arcane bullshit with your solar powers. I ribbed back. He laughed deprecatingly. That doesn't mean I haven't been trying. Trying how? I asked seriously. An example would help. You know how in games the sun and light have healing properties and are normally used to heal or restore? He asked. That's what I've been trying. Okay, I see what you're saying. I nodded. So ice would be slowing and debilitating, not just sharp water that's been frozen. Exactly. He smiled, like a debuff. But how would that fit into my fighting style? I'm not exactly geared for afflictions and debuffs. How should I know? I'm just pointing out that there's more to it than how you look at it. Fighting isn't all about who can hit harder. He laughed. I fell silent and he went on to babble about something else. After that conversation, I looked at my next choice of skill differently. Instead of seeing what would immediately slot in and be useful for my repertoire, I looked at what would expand it instead. Jotun armor would bring the dispelling effect, icy connection would bring its namesake, the connection between me and my ice, and frozen leech would bring the negative aspect Austin talked about. Of the three, I found the last most important. If I could turn the wintry domain I already used into something that sapped energy and slowed, it would allow me to fight in more than one dimension. That dimension being strength of arm and body. Right now, if I couldn't overpower or outlast, I would lose. Sparring with Austin introduced another weakness, making a third, not being able to hit something, but that wasn't something I could remedy with my available skill choices. The boss was a perfect example. If I'd been alone, and the boss was a creature I found in the wild, I wouldn't have been able to defeat it. It would have been a long and hard battle, but ultimately, I would have lost. My attacks dealt damage and my defense was enough for me to hold my own, but it would have drained me dry in the end. If I could have leached its energy and drained it of mana and stamina, I might have won solo. Frozen Leech, epic. The cold saps heat, but that isn't all it can do. Both mana and stamina are forms of energy that can be leached away. Use Cold Align mana to target one or both of an enemy's energies. More powerful energies require more mana to sap. The skill description listed mana and stamina explicitly, but I was curious as to how far the skill could be pushed. Pushing skills wasn't high on my priority list, and I hadn't dedicated enough time to doing so with most of my skills, but there would be time eventually. Gabriel had already explored doing so himself and had some interesting results. I doubted the skill would stop at only those two. Could I sap speed? Slow people's movement? Momentum was a form of energy. How would that work? The new avenues the skill opened up were too big to ignore, and was why my choice was much easier than others before it. Choosing Frozen Leech as my fifth skill in my class only left one more, but I was confident it was my best option. My next skill choice would be Brutal. The last one always was. Chapter 244, Intolerance. Tiredness, fatigue, and exhaustion were feelings that rarely showed themselves nowadays. Endurance was a wonderful thing, pushing the waking hours further with every point, but there were still times it felt like my mind had been wrung dry of all its energy. Our council meetings had a way of doing that. Tedium, the very definition of the word, was the only way to describe it. I wished they were easier, and I wasn't responsible for so many people and so many different projects, but I was the one to build the city I couldn't leave now, no matter how much I wanted to. "Hey, buddy." Austin jogged up next to me. "How ya doin'?" A deep, cathartic groan was only half my response. "What is it, Austin?" "I'm tired and a warm cozy bed is calling my name." "Oh, come on," he said, slapping me on the back. "You know there's no rest for the wicked." His laughs at his own joke weren't mirrored, and I only stared at him to get to the point. "I just got out of a 4-hour meeting. I'm not really in the mood for you." Failing to find an adequate word, I just waved at him vaguely from head to toe. "I know. I've been waiting for you to finish," he said. "So you knew I was in a meeting and waited to ambush me after I was out?" I asked rather discourteously before thinking of something else. "Why weren't you in there with me if you knew?" He scoffed. "And be this energetic and lively." He motioned at my disheveled appearance. "No thank you. I wouldn't be caught dead in there." I stopped walking and turned to face him square. "What is it, Austin?" "I want to go to bed." He lost the sarcasm for a moment and spoke truly. "I wanted to talk to you," then rushed to say, "It's fine though, it can wait." No. Might as well knock everything out in the same day. "Can we do it in my room at least?" I said. It was rare for Austin to not be flippant, and I'd known him long enough that when he tried to brush something off like it didn't matter, it was likely the exact opposite. "Sure," he said. following behind me to my part of the castle. After everyone settled in, a few rooms were left vacant. That being the case, I was able to expand from my office/bedroom combination and have 3 separate rooms connected on the same wing. My forge in one room, my bedroom in another, and my office in the last. It basically cut me off from the rest of the wing, but that was fine. Being far enough away from others let me forge anytime I wanted without worrying about noise. Gabriel's enchantments made sure of that. As soon as I learned a rune for noise cancellation, they would get an upgrade. The walk from the meeting room to my bedroom wasn't long. Up a floor and over a few hallways and we were there. My flop onto my soft fur-covered bed was rather dramatic but well-deserved in my opinion. Comfortable and relaxed, I let Austin start the conversation. He took a seat in a chair off to the side and fiddled with his hands. A bad sign if there ever was one. Austin looking for the right words. I was wondering what your plans were now? After the winter we had? I'm not sure. That was what our meeting was about. I sighed. We've achieved everything we've set out to achieve. I'm nearing my evolution as well as the others. We got the noble title, and everyone is ready for what may come. And about the ticking time bomb in the south? Still up in the air. My face tightened thinking about the discussion we had about that. Some want to set off immediately while others want to wait for more information. All we have is rumors and hearsay. Have you considered what's going to happen down there? Austin pointedly asked. Sensing a deeper question, I allowed him to continue. Everyone on this side of the mountains has heard about it by now. Everyone will be planning something. And? What does that have to do with anything? I asked. Instead of elaborating, he changed direction. Have you thought about what'll happen if we fail? Well, that's a rather pessimistic thought, I responded. Chris, I'm serious. He wasn't laughing or smiling. Taking a deep sigh, I have. It'd be stupid not to consider it. Our protection will end. Any nearby force will be able to come and do what they want with our planet. We aren't even D-rank yet, and if that happens, it won't end well. Austin said pointedly. I know, Austin, but what do you want me to do about it? I asked. If that happens, we can only hope that we can persevere. Austin shook his head. How many times in history has a more advanced civilization met a less advanced one, and it go well for the lesser? Not once, I thought. I understand, but I can't change the outcome just because I want to. We will either succeed or we won't. All we can do is show up and do our best. Before he could ask something else or take the conversation in a different direction, I interrupted. What is this about, Austin? You know I don't like this convolution. Tell it to me straight. It was his turn to sigh. I'm worried. His face was heavy and he slumped forward. Extremely worried. A joke comparing him to Abigail came to mind, but I didn't voice it. He was being serious and now wasn't the time for a joke. Worried about what exactly? You obviously have a point to this conversation. You haven't seen the world, the state that it's in. His eyes were sad, not brimming with tears, but a distant sad, mourning about things past. It's not pretty. I'm not a naive teenager, Austin. I expected as much. No, he said firmly. You haven't seen it, experienced it. And you have. My retort was tinted with a bit of heat at the insinuation. He didn't respond for a second, but eventually nodded slowly. Finding Marcus wasn't my first stop. That wasn't how he described his journey. Not in his letters or how he described it in person. Plenty of other cities or ruins now were in between there and here. Death was only the beginning. Seeing Austin choked up was saddening. People are cruel. I wanted to ask why he left that part out, but it was rather obvious. I've seen cruelty. We've had murders and assaults. I've had to deal with more people than I care to admit, I said, thinking back on the execution I partook in. While it was necessary, and I didn't feel guilty, it was still another life I had reaped. Do you know how many people I've killed? Austin's question was off topic. We killed the thieves in the tutorial together and what happened to Christian a few more during our journey north, but other than that, he was off on his own. If we split the thieves, we were about equal. I had the Mindbreaker and the execution in town, but I assumed Austin had a few during his travels. I don't know, 30-something? I said. It was near my own number. I didn't count the thralls. Those weren't people anymore. Over 100. I didn't know how to respond. Would-be thugs. Thieves after my stuff. Hell, murderers who wanted to kill me purely for the sake of killing. Or people who wanted to kill me just for the essence. His voice was rising. One group even tried to enslave me. I'm sorry, Austin. That was all I could say. How else was I supposed to respond? Don't be... He waved off. All of them deserved it. I'm telling you this to paint the picture. You've done well. You turned an area into a safe haven, and for that you should be proud. But in doing so, you've blinded yourself of the horrors that happen elsewhere. You've seen the fort, yes? He asked, and I nodded. That would be considered one of the good ones. Denial flashed in my head. The fort was awful. People wore rags and fought for food. The slums were just as large in area as the rest of the city. Austin noticed my face. Now you understand. Of everywhere with a pylon, not all of them are just. Even just is too much. Some are downright evil. I took in his words, but all it did was confuse me further. What was his point? He didn't say all this for no reason. I understand. What is it that truly worries you? You do. I stuttered for a second. Austin and I were close, but we never really had hearts-to-hearts like this. It wasn't our style. I understand your worry, but I will be fine. A flash of something else appeared briefly. Not anger or sadness. I'm not worried for your life, but your intolerance. Confusion colored my face. My intolerance? What do you think will happen in the South? He said. Everyone knows about it. People will come from every corner of the East to fight for what may come. It's common knowledge that the outcome of failure is death. Civilization is only just picking up the pieces. If we don't succeed and outside forces are allowed to invade, we will fall. Everyone with a brain knows that. Even the most cruel and self-centered understand the position they're in. All creeds and ideals will be there. From the most evil of scum to the most holy of saints. I was beginning to understand what he was leading up to, but I asked him plainly, "What are you getting at? Your dad's philosophy has made you rigid, unbending when it comes to morals and criminality or things that are similar. Don't deny it because I've seen it," he said. My immediate knee-jerk reaction was to do as he said and deny it, but I held my tongue. I will not compromise my ideals, you know that. My words were somewhat harsh. I swore to him that I wouldn't. Austin was exacerbated. And I'm not asking you to. All I ask is that you will be tolerant. This test is more important than you. He spat. I need to know that you won't ruin it. If we get down there with everyone that arrives, there can be no infighting. Before he could get further into his rant, I held up my hand to stall him. I agree. He looked confused and like he wanted to say more, but couldn't. Agreeing with his point took the wind out of his sails. You agree? He asked. Yes. I answered. This test is more important than me. I was never going to go down there with the intent to police anyone. The reason I've become so rigid, as you put it, is because I have to. People need to know that laws will be upheld here and that actions have consequences. I'm intolerant because that's what is required. When we arrive, it won't be my intention to force my ideals on everyone there. I don't care about what any of them do. The world isn't my responsibility. Only my small piece of it is. Austin looked confused. After everything that happened with Tracy, and what I heard about you almost getting into a fight with the fort over a difference of opinion? No, I scoffed. I almost beat him senseless because he was being a jackass. So if you see someone that goes against your code, you're not going to kill them? His air quotes around code was slightly insulting, but I understand where he was coming from. No, I said. At least not until the test is over. I smirked. After that, they're fair game. Chapter 245, Faction Colors. Was this all you were worried about, or was there something else? I asked. No, that was it. It's nothing against you, but I needed to make sure we were on the same page. I saw enough infighting during my trip and I'm worried that whatever this turns into won't go over well, he said. How do you think it will go? I didn't think it would be a problem, I asked curiously. We had discussed the possibility of things going south during our meeting, but we weren't confident it would happen. Oh, it's probably nothing, but think about it from an outside perspective. You've been the strongest around since we got out of the tutorial, but people will be there from all over the country. From New York all the way to Florida, or what Florida turned into. Millions of people, some of which will be just as strong if not stronger than you are, he said. Picking up what he was getting at, I continued for him. And you think so many people used to being in control and the strongest in the room won't play well together? He nodded. I've seen it before, especially with pylon owners. Well, I can't say anything for others, but I promise to play nice, I said and looked over at him. Happy? He nodded. How come you're bringing this up in the first place? This isn't like you, I asked. Austin sighed and looked down. It's what I saw during my trip. The animosity people have is sometimes frightening. How do you figure? On an individual level, people take things strictly because they can. I ran into plenty of people who would steal the clothes off my back if they thought they were stronger. While some would stop at theft, plenty more would kill me just for the essence. But I'm more worried about a higher level. Pylon owners or factions that hate each other. Marcus and his faction hate the reservation. Not to the point it's open war, but I wouldn't be surprised if they got into a fight if they met. Chicago has already been conquered through war, and there are probably countless other stories similar enough, Austin said. But you, up here far away from everything, haven't experienced it. There isn't even a faction you're on bad terms with. I jumped to correct him. Ashton and I aren't on the best terms. Yes, but would it devolve into a full-blown fight if you saw him again? He asked. No, I answered. Ashton had sent a few letters since the incident and our relationship was on the mend. It helped that we were both profiting from the mine and growing our respective cities. All right, I see your point. Is there anything else you wish to lecture me on, Mother? I smirked. Hey, there's no need for name-calling. Just calling it like I see it. Austin laughed and got up from my bed to wander around the room. There is actually. You never told me about the changes, my lord. His bow was totally insincere. Other than the usual of increased range and whatnot, a few other things changed. The positions we can appoint grew so a few more people can be chosen. It also increased what already appointed members can do. Jonathan now has the ability to link a marketplace to our pylon. Abigail has a few more management tools at her disposal and a few other tricks. Most of the advantages won't make themselves known until people start evolving. The class and profession upgrades for people will be a lot better than they would otherwise be. Austin waved his hands. Whoa there. Move it back a little bit. Jonathan can link a what now? As our head merchant, he can dedicate a building to be linked to our pylon. There are stipulations, such as the building has to be used as a marketplace, trading hall, or auction house. But that isn't hard to fulfill. I answered. And what does this linking do? Depending on the rank of the merchant doing the linking, and the level of the pylon being linked, the benefits differ. It makes everything better for his profession. A better discount on purchase, cheaper teleportation fees, and wider range of the shop function of the pylon. It also allows for the building to be used as a terminal, if that makes sense. Before, people had to come to the pylon directly to buy things, but now there and be a dedicated building for that. I said, Huh, is it only for merchants, or others too? Philip got a few upgrades for his profession, making construction easier, and he can now use a city map function. It helps zone the city for certain things and give him real-time updates on construction, and Elliot and Hal got a few changes that should make their job easier. That's cool, I guess. Not really anything super, but I guess they were happy. Austin tried and failed to sound enthusiastic. Speaking of, I had Vinny make you something. Austin then pulled a small box out of his pocket. The size of it was rather small, and it surprised me that I hadn't noticed it before. Not that I had been looking. The dimensions of the box gave me an inkling of what was in it, but opening it confirmed my suspicions. A ring, I said, trying to be nice. Rings weren't something I wore. the one from the tutorial being the sole exception. My strength was too much for delicate jewelry. Rings would bend or break when I wielded my hammer. Rings usually being made from delicate metal didn't help. Gold being as soft as it was a stray breath from me could deform it. Don't be like that. I had Vinny make it as strong as he could, Austin said. Even if he did, and it holds up now, it won't eventually. At the rate my strength grew, the ring wouldn't last. I did notice that the alloy he used was particularly strong, but I was unsure of how long it would hold up. I gained a decent amount of strength every level. Then we'll make another. A baron should have a signet ring. That much is common sense. Taking a closer look at the ring made it obvious of its intended use. The circular face was left blank, but the rest of the ring was polished to a shine. It was ready to be carved into whatever shape I desired. I had a sigil in mind already, the one I used to carve into my hammer during creation, but so much had changed that a new one wasn't out of the picture. You don't even have a flag or at least a banner. You should at least choose official colors. Our faction needs some representation before we go down south. Even Marcus has a flag. Austin complained. Oh, I'm sorry. Should I have done that before or after fighting a horde of demons? I'm just saying. Austin shrugged. I'll get right on that. Jayla. The harshest of the winter snows were already breaking and the last blast of cold would soon be gone with it. The mountain blocked the worst of the weather, but that wouldn't be the case out in the Great Plains. Are they ready? She asked. Walter double-checked a sheet of paper off to the side before responding. We are. It should take a month to reach Yellowstone. She had to fight to keep the scowl from her face. Everything had been going fine up until the obelisk was found. After that, so many plans had to be revised and altered. The trade routes she hoped to forge were put on hold. The growing communication network she had been working to establish stagnated, and all kinds of construction works had to be put on hold. The only good thing to come out of this lengthy detour was the fact her dungeons would grow while she was gone. There was one in the city that had 9 floors and one a jog away that only had 8. If they managed to grow a few more while she was gone dealing with whatever the obelisk turned out to be, that would be wonderful. Still, her vision of large caravans and messengers taking shape and ready to head out to various pylons changed into a different one. Instead, it was an army geared up and headed toward the obelisk. Being so far away from where it was found made her have to leave so much earlier than the timer indicated. To reach St. Louis before summer, they had to leave now. A month? She groaned. Even with dedicated wagoneers and caravan leaders? Yes, ma'am, Walter said without looking up from his work. They can only do so much. Jayla wanted to continue pestering the man with questions but held back. She knew most of the answers anyway, she just didn't like them. To cut down on travel time, she was only bringing the strongest of her city. This was going to be something people from all over came for, which made the drivel she could drag with her not worth the effort. Low ear ranks weren't even worth it in her opinion. The 2,000 or 3,000 she could bring wouldn't amount to much with the number she was predicting would already be there. Instead, over 500 of her best were standing ready to move out, only waiting on her order. It would have been more, but many were lost trying to break through the mountains. Eaten by flying beasts if they tried to climb it. Eaten by subterranean beasts if they tried to dig through. Eaten by, well, anything. They stopped sending people after the first few didn't make it. Still, people gave it a go against the warnings. Either they had family on the other side they hoped to reach, or they were seeking out something powerful to fight. The former was understandable, the latter was foolish. Still, it was what she had, and she looked over the men and women gathered with a certain pride. Felt good. She didn't plant the city here and build it up to rule, but the more she watched it grow, the prouder she felt when things went right. They'd first go through Yellowstone to resupply and combine with his army. The thought rankled her, but it was better than going alone. I trust you to keep everything running, Walter, she said. I don't know how this will go, but I understand, ma'am. I'll make sure there's a city to return to, he said. It was funny how quickly trust could be brokered. Before the tutorial, Jayla hadn't even met the man, but she would trust him with her life if it came to it now. They'd shed blood together and had each other's backs through thick and thin. Errant rock dust began to vibrate as bell tolls marked the time. The deep tones caused everything not bolted down to rattle slightly. "It's time," she said. "Marcus, how are the preparations?" Marcus asked the group in front of him. The meeting table was full with every member of his upper management, and all of them were working on various things, but only one interested Marcus right now. They had been working throughout the winter to make it feasible, yet nothing had gone right and the project was still being worked on. "On schedule," Gregory said. Marcus raised an eyebrow at that but didn't mention anything. He'd heard the latest reports, and the fact they were barely on schedule was left unmentioned. "And the latest test? Another failure." His grip tightened around the wooden armrest, but he controlled it enough to not break the chair. After their success in defeating the swarm, everything moved swiftly. Some more swiftly than others. His city had one advantage over all others, and Marcus wanted to make use of that advantage. Yet he couldn't. Being placed at the start of the Mississippi River should have been a boon. Fresh water, a major waterway that could lead to anywhere in the world, and plenty of trading opportunities downstream. Yet, instead of the massive advantage, the river had only brought problems. First, it was the bugs, then it was the water life, and now it was roaming beasts. Defending the treasure was hard enough, but making use of the river was another story. Boats were torn apart by both monsters and the environment. Rapids took to magic with gusto, turning deadly to even someone with levels, and the beasts were better left unmentioned. The fact some were big enough to see the boats as a snack was worrying enough. Their attempts to make them stronger didn't work either, as that only delayed the inevitable. Massive steel hulls held up the longest, but they were torn apart before they could even reach the next city. The only test that went even remotely positive was the one where Marcus captained the vessel himself. He was able to fend off the worst of the creatures, but even he wasn't enough to last forever. If their plans to reach the obelisk by river were to be realized, they would need to pick up the pace. Dedicate more materials to the shipyards. All the metal we can spare and best planks should go toward the boat project, Marcus ordered. And get every able-bodied enchanter to figure out a way to make this work. They had dabbled in enchanting the hulls, but that took time and effort they couldn't afford to waste. The time and materials it took to enchant one boat could have been used to construct half a dozen others. "Any word from the south?" he asked. A pile of paper was handed to him detailing the recent events they knew of. Some of it worth knowing, while the rest were pointless rumors. The Heartlands Alliance roped in another pylon into its faction. The reservation were testing the borders. The bits that were useful, he picked out of the stack and moved to write a letter of his own. While they hadn't been here long, they had made a lasting impression. Chapter 246, Interviews. Chris. Letters and information continued to roll in from various outlets, and all of them told of the same picture. Marcus and Ashton both sent messages that I had to respond to as well, detailing the situation. Ashton and his faction were doing their best to mend our relationship, and I couldn't fault them for trying. Their letters were welcome, and it was nice to have Marcus to cross-check them against. But there was one bit that Ashton had that Marcus didn't, and I couldn't use him to check against. When the demon threat arose, there were 3 pylons in range. 3 cities had the opportunity to stand against it, and only 2 had. Frostheim and the fort had stood together, while the last had declined the chance to send aid, closing their borders and hiding behind their walls. I knew little about the 3rd pylon at the time, but after quite the year, I learned much more than I had before and could now pin a name and place to a map. The city was called Lakeshore and was located along the northern shores of Lake Superior, if that was what we were still calling it. Farther to the south from us than the fort, and much more defensive. They didn't like anyone nearing their city, and even scouts were turned away from entering. I wasn't even sure who led the city, let alone the name of the faction behind it. I had sent a few representatives, but after having the 3rd turned away, I stopped trying. If they wished to be left alone, I would oblige them. That being said, Ashton was a lot closer and his people had a lot more interactions or incidents. I wasn't sure if they had come to blows, but I knew they were treading lightly when it came to their shared border. In Ashton's opinion, from what his interactions and scouts indicated, Lakeshore was making no moves to travel south. They either didn't know or didn't care about what the obelisk meant. It wasn't that much of a surprise with how they dealt with the demon threat. Our response was still being discussed, but it was something to consider. If we left with everything we had, we would be leaving our cities exposed. I didn't need Ashton to tell me that much. Knock, knock, knock. Chris, they're ready for you, Abigail said through the door. Sigh. After a long, relaxing winter, things were picking up at a feverish pace. The literal timer ticking down had everything on a strict timeline. Having to juggle so many different things was annoying. Hopefully, this meeting wouldn't be a waste of time and would work to alleviate some of my workload. That was right, I was finally going to pick an assistant. Abigail was less than pleased when I ran off before she could force me to pick. Not that I hadn't had good reason to do so, she just didn't agree with said reason. I thought the timing was off. It would be pointless to choose someone and then go off for months leaving them to fend for themselves. Not only would that be cruel, it would be pointless. There wasn't enough time for them to learn what I needed them to do, and trying to rush it would only have made things harder when I came back. Not that logic stopped my sister from nagging me. Now that I was back, and enough time had passed to get everything back in order, it was time. I stood from my paper-filled desk and pulled open the door. All the candidates are gathered? All the ones that passed muster. Good. The list of applications was longer than I expected it to be, but after a preliminary screening, only about a dozen were left. Both my mother and Abigail took it upon themselves to narrow it down for me, which was wonderful because I didn't want to do more interviews than I had to. Abigail and I walked toward one of the larger meeting rooms in the castle and were quickly met with a nearly filled room of people. It was filled with all kinds of possibilities. Men, women, young or old. All were represented. Higher than average number considering the total amount of people were younger women. I only raised an eyebrow at Abigail, to which she acted like she didn't notice. My mother at work again. You would think her meddling in my love life would have ended when the world did, but I guess not. I nearly wanted to dismiss those options in retaliation but held off. It wasn't right for them to be dismissed like that. Not after being called here for the opportunity. Thank you all for coming, I said to the group. This shouldn't take up too much of your time. I plan to have a quick one-on-one with all of you and ask some deeper questions that aren't listed on this sheet. Said sheet was the application they submitted. Afterwards, I will notify the person or persons that will be accepted. All of them nodded without saying a word, so I moved along. First up is a quick look down to the top sheet. Talia Richards. The portly woman followed me out of the room and into a smaller one across the hall. She was older, not old, but approaching middle age and looked like she had experience in the job previously. A quick glance at her application sheet gave me the bare details. Name Talia Richards. Class Mage, high F rank. Profession Secretary, high F rank. Highest stat Intelligence. The sheet was much more extensive than what I could have done. The scouts had grown tremendously in information gathering, and the range of skills they had was continuously growing. Some had upgraded Identify 2 times, and matched with a high perception from their build, they got a lot more information back than what I could do. The group even had a few with Sense Weakness. Not that it was particularly helpful in choosing an assistant. Tell me about yourself. The standard interview question I always hated answering. Mwahaha. The shoe's on the other foot now. After Talia came Sophia. Name Sophia Rigetti. Class Healer, mid E rank. Profession Assistant, high F rank. Highest stat Wisdom. Next. Name Matthew Smith. Class Support, low E rank. Profession Personal Assistant, mid F rank. Highest stat Acumen. Next. The interviews continued until an oddity appeared on the next sheet. One that should have been caught before getting this far. Abigail, can you come in here, please? I called out and looked at the sheet closer. Name Miles Whitmore. Class Warrior, mid E rank. Profession Artificer, low F rank. Highest stat Strength. What is this? I asked as she walked in. She didn't even have to look at the sheet to know which one it was. That was included on Hal's recommendation. Hal? He wasn't even involved in the selection process. Why? The man doesn't even have the profession. One of the trackers in Hal's order asked him for a favor. She said it like it all made sense now. But why? I asked, confused. Nothing about the application hinted at the man wanting to be an assistant, let alone being geared toward it. I don't know. Hal asked me to include him, so I did. If you want answers, ask the man yourself. She huffed. Fine, send him in. The interruption was intriguing rather than disruptive. I was over halfway through and it was already getting dull. The same answers and similar enough stories that they were beginning to mesh together. I had a feeling that this one was going to be different. Curiosity piqued. I watched intently as the man walked in. Nothing about him screamed secretary, which I expected from reading his sheet. He wore standard clothing, much like everyone else that came in. Heavy furs were still in season and would be for a while longer. Even if winter was waning, it was still nippy. The first thing that stood out was that he was young. Not baby-faced or freshly classed, but teenager age. Maybe a touch older as stats made things wonky. He wasn't built, not like Vincent, but he was getting there. Stocky enough that it wasn't surprising he was a warrior. His choice of weapon was a mystery, as he wasn't armed, but I could tell he used plate armor. The walk was subtly different, as if he was used to working around the restrictions heavy plate came with. He used heavy armor and his highest stat was strength, a man after my own heart. I hadn't bothered to scan any of the previous interviewees as it wasn't worth it, but I made an exception for Miles. Aura scanning was still a newer art, but I was getting the hang of it with training. Instead of using skills like my useless identify, I leveraged my stronger aura to feel out an enemy, or in this case, a potential assistant. The man was strong for his level. Not insanely so, but enough to stand above the average. What killed him was his lack of profession levels. He was missing out on a lot of stat points by leaving it so far behind. That wasn't what I focused on. It was his affinity that I zeroed in on. It wasn't that rare, but it wasn't one I saw often. Usually it was plant, nature, or something along those lines if it was on the greener side. Wood was a specific subset of nature that not many people had. And it didn't do well in the cold. It didn't take long to scan the man and give him a once-over. He had just finished sitting down by the time I was finished. All right, level with me, man. Why are you here? He flinched at my directness, but didn't shy away. Some of the others looked like I was going to eat them when I asked them questions. To become your assistant, he answered firmly. I eyed him up and down. Yes, but nothing about this. I waived the application, says assistant. I will work just as hard as a professional assistant, if not harder. There's nothing that they can do that I cannot, he said vigorously and intently. While that was technically true, that was a rather bold claim. One I wasn't sure he would be able to back up. Do you plan on changing your profession? I asked. No, sir. Don't call me sir, I said out of habit. Do you plan on evolving it towards secretary or assistant? I don't, my lord. I visibly cringed. Wrong direction. Don't call me that either. While Miles was a fun distraction to the rest of the interviews, I did need to get on with my day. I'll ask again, why are you here? I want to be your assistant. He doubled down, but before I waved the man out, he continued, I'll work without pay if you'll let me. All I ask is you let me watch you fight and teach me if you have time. That made me stop. You want to watch me fight? The request was unexpected, especially the offer to work without pay. Yes, I want to learn from you, he said sincerely. Complicated feeling arose in me. It felt good for someone to want to learn from me, but it also confused me. What was I supposed to teach? I wasn't a master with my weapon. I wasn't a master tactician. Most of my power came from pure effort, not some underlying mastery. I took a second look at his information. Tell me about your profession. Why is it so far behind? His face fell. That wasn't my plan. I wanted to keep it near my class level, but circumstances weren't in my favor. The scavenging for food didn't leave a lot of time for artificing, let alone gathering the materials required. He went on to detail his rough return and the highs and lows of his journey since then. It was filled with tragedy and sorrow, but Miles didn't despair because of it but worked harder to move on. It was a touching story. At the end of it, I was actually considering hiring him. All right, I'll consider your application. If you could send in the next one, please. We do need an artificer. Phones would be useful, maybe he could reinvent technology. I wondered if he was hellbent on the assistant job or if he would be open to something else. I doubted he would refuse, and there were a lot of advancements he could do for us. He would get along with Gabriel well. Chapter 247 Teaching. Is there one that you like? Abigail asked after all the interviews were over. There was one, but I felt like ignoring it strictly on principle. Based strictly on performance and how well they would be at the job right off the bat, the best candidate was Sophia. Although both could do the job, assistant was a better fit for what I was looking for than secretary. With that in mind, she had the highest level than all the others. The only problem was I knew what people would say. She just happened to be pretty. Not that I was biased just because of a beautiful face, but because she was the best fit. It helped that she was personable and easy to talk to without being a sycophant. Half of them were too busy trying to grovel and kiss my ass that I wanted to kick them out right away. Sophia is the best fit, but I'm thinking of choosing Matthew instead, I said. Matthew was the second best option. His profession was a little different, being a personal assistant, but it was close enough to work. He also had a decently high level in it. Oh, the pretty blonde? Who could have guessed? She said with such fake surprise. Why is it funny? She's the best fit from an objective point of view. I defended a tad too heatedly. Objective, really? Abigail questioned. Just to clear things up, how many of your ex-girlfriends were blondes? That has no bearing on this decision. Oh, really? If that's the case and you want to be objective, why don't you narrow it down to 3 and have Vinny choose for you? Then it would truly be impartial. Abigail poked, trying to rile me up. I knew she didn't care that much and I could have denied it, but I didn't. Fine. I rose to the bait. These 3. I had already ranked them and the top 3 were easy to pick out. Sophia, Matthew, and Stephen. I did notice how she picked Vincent to be the judge over other options. Austin was the last person to be impartial, as he would literally pick the prettiest face. Jonathan wouldn't care, and he hated being put in the middle of our squabbles and would refuse. We came to him too many times and he'd wizened up. Our mother was out of the question, as I would veto that, which left Vincent. Mostly because he wouldn't care one way or the other and he was always results-oriented. The thought of being biased towards a pretty face wouldn't even pop up in his head. How he ever got married before me made me question myself. He was easy to find in his forge and we quickly filled him in on what we wanted. Which one would you choose, Vincent? I asked. The sweltering heat threatened to burn the papers to a crisp and I had to continually cool the air around them to keep that from happening. This one. His choice was swift, and after looking at all 3's information, chose the top one. Sophia's. See, I was being objective. I had to rub it in, just a little bit. Abigail didn't push back. Fine. I'll call her back in. Before she walked away, I called out, and get Miles. I have a different job for him. Hiring Sophia was easily done and it took less than a few minutes. There wasn't any onboarding or HR paperwork to fill out. All she had to do was swear an oath to not betray us and to keep anything she learned secret. Miles, on the other hand, was different. Miles, nice to see you again, I said as the man walked into my office. His eyes flicked to where Sophia sat and he knew that he didn't get the position. As you noticed, I hired someone else for the assistant position. Maybe having her shadow me wasn't the best idea for this conversation, rubbing in the fact I chose someone else. But I had something else in mind for you. Like what? He asked. It was clear he was disappointed at not being chosen, but also intrigued by my offer. Well, I want to put your artificer profession to good use. It would have gone to waste being an assistant, I said. What I want is for you to become a faction artificer. Under contract, so to speak. Work on researching and building things that we need. He reacted hesitantly, which was a surprise. I thought he would jump at the opportunity. How would that work? Will I be forced to only work on what you want me to? Miles was thinking through what the job would entail. Not absolutely. You will have free time to work on whatever it is you desire. Think of it more like a 9-to-5 job. Work on the things we need for most of the day and the rest is up to you. I said. And the pay? Will you teach me? He was hopeful. That much was clear. I sighed. I'm not exactly sure what you want me to teach you. It doesn't look like you use a hammer and I'm not the best weapon master. He looked at me like I was crazy. The disbelief was palpable. But yes, I can teach you. It won't be one-on-one, but in a larger group if that's okay with you. The man nodded vehemently. With our departure nearing, I planned to train with the guard orders anyway. Good, I asked. Good. Great. The first thing I need you to work on is communications. Speak with my brother, Gabriel, first to see where he's at with it before you dive in. He's been working on enchanting a way to communicate over long distances. I want you to see if there's a technological way, or if combining technology and enchantments will work. I ordered. Is that all you need? A way to communicate? Miles asked skeptically. Well, no, but anything beyond that is for the future. Once you finish with that, I'll give you something else. I said. Communication and travel come first. After that is when we'll explore other options. Miles turned to leave. Oh, one more thing. We train in the mornings, so be ready bright and early. Miles, the past few days had been a whirlwind. He'd been called in for the assistant interview, and not only did he finally meet the city lord, but he totally bombed the interview. The man said he would take it into consideration, but it was clear to Miles that he wasn't going to be selected, which was what made the callback surprising. He was nearly positive that he wasn't going to get the job. He was surprised he was even called in for the first interview, let alone for another one. Seeing one of the other candidates in the room when he entered killed those hopes. Instead of being thanked for his time and dismissed, he was offered a different job. One that fit his interests much more. It was annoying to have his research constrained by what was needed, but it was better than nothing. He'd barely scratched the surface of what was possible with his profession, and he was excited to start exploring it deeper. All the levels he'd already gained came from the tutorial, and he was eager to start increasing it again. He was barely a few levels into F rank, and he'd only received one skill from his profession at his current rank. Better yet, the city lord agreed to train him, which he was running late for. Gavin and Lewis had forced Miles to go out to celebrate, as his new job was something they deemed a celebration was mandatory for. Martha's was already their go-to tavern, and there were even drinks to be had. Alesh were still out of the picture, as all the grain was needed as food, but meads were being made by some of the more entrepreneurial natures. They were god-awful and in drastic need of a different flavor profile, but it was at least alcohol. If Miles didn't know any better, he'd wager the berries used were poisonous to begin with. If only they had honey. They weren't able to drink long, both because there wasn't that much available and because Miles didn't want to be late the following morning. To make a good impression, he planned to arrive 10 minutes early, but he was going to be lucky to make it on time now. His pace was swift and he had to be mindful not to slip on the snow, but he made it to the courtyard in time. He'd have to adjust his schedule going forward, as getting through the inner wall delayed him longer than he thought. His apartment was closer to the outer wall than to the inner wall, which made everything all the longer to get through the city. Miles wished for a friendly face in the crowd but found none. Gavin wasn't a warrior and was off training somewhere else, and Lewis wasn't a member of an order. The large group Miles stood a part of were strictly strength-focused warriors or warrior-adjacent. Evolutions made some of the distinctions difficult. A hush quelled the voices as the city lord made his way over. He was already armored and had his notorious warhammer strapped to his back. All right, let's get this started," he announced. "Is this everyone, Elliot?" "Yes, sir." "Good," Chris nodded. "As I'm sure everyone here is aware, our test is nearing. In a short few months, something will happen and we need to be ready for it. Our current intelligence suggests that it's going to occur in St. Louis. That being the case, we have even less time to prepare. The journey there alone will take a couple of months, shorter if Marcus succeeds in his venture. With that in mind, I've decided to take a more active role in your training." Members of the crowd looked around at each other worriedly. "Don't be alarmed. I won't harm anyone too badly, as that would defeat the purpose of training." A collective breath was released. "But We will have healers standing by in case something goes wrong. A woman Miles hadn't noticed before off to the side waved. She looked familiar, but Miles couldn't pinpoint why. Now, Chris took his hammer off his back and planted it in front of him. While I see a few sporting a warhammer like my own, most of you do not. I see some swords, great swords, battle axes, maces, and everything else. There's nothing wrong with any particular weapon, as it only matters what your preference is. So, I won't be going into detail about my fighting style specific to my hammer, but how I approach fighting in general. Basic instincts, what I've learned, and so on. Additionally, if your fighting style revolves around speed, or agility is your highest stat, you are in the wrong spot. Austin is leading the training for that out in the woods. If you use a shield or focus on defense, that is also in a different spot. Miles looked around, but no one seemed to be hurrying to leave. Now, before we begin, there are a few ground rules. Chris announced, Rule number 1. If I see anybody leave their feet, there will be a punishment. Your legs and hips are the base of your power, and jumping in the air eliminates that. You might as well be swinging a wet noodle at that point. Rule number 2. While this is training and there will be spars, try not to kill anyone. Small injuries are to be expected, but if I see anyone aiming to cripple or kill, I will dismiss them. And 3, Chris smiled. We will not be using wooden or dulled weapons. Pain is inevitable, and it's better to get over it now than when your life depends on you not flinching. Chris picked up his hammer. Are there any questions? No one spoke. Good. Now pair off into twos and begin warming up. He rolled his shoulders back and forth. Who wants to be my partner? Chapter 248. Trust your armor. Chris, you need to trust your armor, I shouted as I watched the two fighters go at it. I put a rune of protection on that chest piece myself. I know it can take that hit. The man's great sword came around for another blow, and instead of jumping away, the woman allowed it to land on her plate armor, which deflected it easily. The two weren't going all out as this was a spar, but it was still enough for the blow to hurt, but she powered through without even a grunt. Good. Teaching was something completely novel to me. I'd never had to do it before, which made the first day a learning curve. How I fought came from experience and instinct, not through someone teaching me how. Finding where to start had been the hardest part. I basically had them spar and watched from the side evaluating how I would do it differently. I didn't know any weapon forms or specific techniques to teach, and with everyone's weapon choice being varied, it wouldn't have done any good. Teaching hammer techniques to someone with a two-handed sword wouldn't have gone over well. Axes would have been fine, but even those would have had trouble applying it to their own weapon. Instead, I boiled down how I fought to the base building blocks, ones that any weapon wielder could use. The first lesson was trust your armor. I noticed it quickly and sought to fix it immediately. Whether it was because I made my own armor at the start or because I would have picked it up anyway, the lesson was one I wholeheartedly believed in. Everyone in my little training group was heavily armed and armored. The way we split up the groups made sure of that. Lighter armor and quicker attacks were training with Austin, as that was how he fought. Shields and dedicated defenders with skills leaning that way rather than offense were with Jonathan. I was the one who trained the heavy hitters, the ones swinging around two-handers or giant battle axes. I wasn't qualified to teach sword techniques, as if I would wield one like a giant club, but I could teach the flow of the fight, which was what I was trying to instill in the group now. All right, stop and rest. I called to the two fighters. Everyone, gather round. The sounds of weapons clashing ceased and footfalls filled in before falling silent as well. Elliot, come help me demonstrate for a second, I called out to the man. Elliot's fighting style was somewhat of a special case, as he didn't fall into a set category. He wore heavy plate, but it could morph and change if he wished. If he needed more speed and was all right with less protection, he could shift the metal around. His weapon of choice was a shield and sword, but that could also change depending on the situation. He could lean more defensive if he wished, but he could also forego defense and go full attack. That being the case, we gave him the choice of who to train under, and he chose me, which was perfect. I knew him well enough that using him as a demonstration partner wasn't awkward. Now, I know all of you learned early to dodge an attack if you could. That much was common sense, right? A chorus of nods answered me. The no be their rule. While that's all well and good, it doesn't really apply to us. I knocked firmly on my breastplate, producing a heavy tink. This isn't just for show. This is what allows us to fight like we do. These, I waved my heavy hammer, take a while to swing, and this, tapping my armor, buys us that. If we had to jump around and dodge every little attack, we'd never get any swings in. Elliot, hit me, I ordered. Without hesitation, he swung his sword and I made no move to block. I could tell it wasn't his full power, but it was most of it. His weapon whipped through the air with nothing but a shrill whistle in its wake before impacting my breastplate heavily. The blow would have staggered most of the group and downright sent the weakest flying, but it was barely enough to draw my attention. Being braced for it helped, but even if I hadn't been, the blow would have been one I ignored in a real battle. The point of this exercise is for you all to learn what kind of blows your armor can take and which it can't. I pointed toward the dull scratch that Elliot's blow created. One I would have to buff out later. Additionally, you need to know how it changes. Throughout the course of a fight, the blows will add up and things will change. A dent, scratch, hole, or any other deformity will alter how it holds up. A dent could cause a sword swing that would have skittered off, to instead grab hold and slice through. I pointed toward the newly made scratch. How do you think a second blow in the same spot will go? It will penetrate deeper because of the weakness. One of the trainees answered. Yes, it will. You need to stay conscious of where your armor's been compromised as well as where it hasn't. At the end of my speech, a hand rose from amidst the crowd and I had to fight against smiling. Most of the guards had been around me long enough not to be scared, but that didn't mean they openly voiced questions. It was annoying at first and made me frustrated, but forcing the issue would only make it worse, which made seeing someone willing to ask a question excited me. Yes. What about those of us with armor skills? A man I wasn't quite sure what his name was asked. I need to learn all the guards' names. I've been too busy. Good question, I said. Different skills will interact in different ways and it's up to you to learn them. My skill, Frost Armor, creates an extra layer of defense that can regenerate. A hit that cracks it means nothing if the ice regenerates quicker than they can destroy it. Skills like steady defense, robust defense, or others similar don't create that extra layer, but they improve what's already there. The key there is to use them when it's needed, not for every paltry blow as that will drain your mana. I lectured. I implore you to test them in the dungeons when you get the chance. Both what your base armor can do and how far your skills can push it. I let that settle in before I moved on. Now that we've covered that, it's time to plan for the inevitability of being injured. I know everyone's armor is strong. I know the man who made it and enchanted it myself, but no armor is impenetrable. How many here have fortitude over 1,000? Paltry 2 people raised their hands. I schooled my look of surprise before I insulted those who didn't. It was easy to forget that not everyone had the same amount of stats that I did. My legendary class along with my 2 stat-boosting passives really put me in a different league when it came to strength and fortitude. Hell, my fortitude without frozen fortitude would be half what it was. Okay. Who all has a body of wood? Thankfully, a lot more hands went up. Anyone go further and get a body of stone? All the hands fell. Figures. I won't make it mandatory, but I strongly recommend going through the process before we leave. I know I will be. I pointedly ignored the looks I was getting. I knew how painful the process was. I went through it myself. I didn't need them to remind me of that. I don't mean to disparage those who don't have a high fortitude or a body of wood, but I strongly recommend changing that. Fighting up close and personal with the beasties will result in injury. A wound that can tear off an arm or a leg could have been a scratch if your body was stronger. Trusting your armor is one thing, but you should still be prepared for when metal meets flesh. Being able to fight like I do is more than just fancy armor. It takes a strong body to shrug off attacks that would cripple others. To look at an attack and do nothing while it lands on your bare flesh is difficult at first, but I will hopefully beat the instinct to dodge out of you. Now, who wants to get beat up first? Having one-on-one fights with everyone present wasn't on my list of things to do, but I went with the natural flow that I felt. Distilling my fighting style down into something I could convey was difficult at first, but it felt good to pass it on. Put things into perspective. I was worried at first. Teaching people how to fight was a responsibility for their safety. If they went into battle unprepared, a portion of the fault lay with the teacher, which was me. But that was just negative thoughts gathering. Refusing to teach them was harsher than being a bad one. Well, teaching objectively wrong things would have been worse, but I wasn't doing that. It took longer than I thought it would to work through the entire group. Some were more resilient than I pegged them for, which extended how long the fights went, but by the end of it I could tell they were trying. The instinct to flinch away was still there, but they were fighting it. Enough time would kill that instinct completely. All right, that's enough for today. Get out of here. Some straight up dropped to the ground at my dismissal. Others limped away slowly. There's no need to be dramatic. That's good. It seems you were rather harsh on them, Austin said. I'd noticed him walking over, which was why I remembered to dismiss them in the first place. I had lost track of time, but seeing that he was done brought it back. They're being dramatic. I only roughed them up a bit. I waved away. Austin looked hesitant to say something but marched on anyway. It's not my place to tell you what to do, but are you sure teaching them that is the right thing to do? The question took me by surprise. What do you mean? I'm teaching them to fight. Yes, but you forget that they don't have anchors like we do, he said. I only just recently got my own, but it makes fighting an entirely different experience. Someone like you, who has one that makes you tougher, can power through attacks on an entirely different level than those who don't have one. Sure, that's true, but the principles are sound. I defended. The principles? He said. What you just taught them could be reworded to take an attack to the face and power through it. I scoffed. That isn't remotely what I said. Oh, really? Tell me where I'm wrong then, Austin challenged. Thinking for a moment, I rephrased his comment. Know which attacks you can take to the face and power through. Austin laughed. That's the same thing. I shook my head. No, it's not. I added a few words. You're impossible, he scoffed. Anyway, I didn't come to debate your teachings. I heard whispers that a tavern here has mead. The excitement in his voice was clear. Do you know how long it's been since I last got drunk? I opened my mouth to answer but was cut off. Too long. That's how long. I waited until he wouldn't cut me off again. Yes, but I don't know if it will work. You knew about it already? He asked like he was offended I didn't tell him. I laughed. Did you think I wouldn't know if someone made drinks in my own city? Wait, what do you mean it won't work? He asked questioningly, just now comprehending the second part of what I said. Technically, alcohol is a poison. How does that work with my stats being what they are? Yours aren't low either. Are you sure you can even get drunk? I questioned. His steps faltered for a second before he resumed his march out of the courtyard at pace. There's an easy solution for that. He turned to me with a smirk. Drink so much it doesn't matter. Something tells me there won't be enough. Chapter 249, Yellowstone. Hendricks. The trip to St. Louis was entirely too long and arduous, but he and his team were finally here. Not that the endpoint had anything flashy enough to be excited about. Most of the pylon cities they passed through on the way here were sparse with their accommodations. Not that he would complain, as most had much bigger problems than an appropriately furnished inn. Gonzalez joked that they were the modern pioneers, traveling for months on end westward like they were on the Oregon Trail. Going from the coast to the middle of the country made for a less than pleasant trip, and every member of his team was ready for the days on the road to be over. St. Louis wasn't at all how he remembered it. He hadn't been here recently, but even if he had been, it would still be remarkably different. The city itself had seen better days. A once busy and populous city had been mostly reduced to ruins. The river splitting it down the center did more harm than good, cutting the entire city in two. Every bridge that used to span it was thoroughly destroyed during the terraforming, and another had yet to be built. Hendricks had assumed that at least something had been done to allow crossing, but he was mistaken. Hendricks' mission was to find the obelisk and confirm the intel they had, which was made impossible if he couldn't cross the river to see it. "Jackson, you've got a water affinity, you think we can swim it?" he asked. The team arrived the previous evening and got some well-deserved rest in a questionable inn, but were now standing before the monstrosity that hindered their journey. The river was massive. So massive Hendrix had trouble seeing the other side. The only way to do so was to use the elevation to your advantage, as being riverside made it impossible. Jackson just looked out over the gushing water that moved quicker than any could hope to swim and firmly said, "Not a chance. Even if it were possible, we'd end up miles downstream, if not dead." "Gonzalez, you think you can build something?" Hendrix asked. The man used to be a combat engineer, and while he didn't pick it up as his profession, he was more than handy enough for small things. "Water as rough as that? Not unless this shithole of a city has a professional shipyard hidden away somewhere," he said dismissively. Swimming and crossing by boat were out. How else were they supposed to get to the other side? "How does the city cross?" Grant asked. He'd been annoying to get used to at first, but he repeatedly proved his usefulness, even if he wasn't former military. "There has to be a way to cross if the information on the obelisk got over." Hendrix wanted to kick himself for not seeing that glaringly obvious hole in logic. If the obelisk was on the western side of the river, and information about it reached the east coast, there had to be a way across or word wouldn't have spread. His team continued throwing out ideas until an elderly gentleman came walking over to their not-so-inconspicuous group. The man carried a tackle box in one hand and a fishing rod in the other, with a wide-brimmed straw hat to complete the ensemble. A quick appraise was enough for Hendrix to dismiss the man as a threat. He was only level 57, and it was in his profession, not his class, which was fisherman, if the getup wasn't clear enough. His team shot looks at the approaching man and stopped talking as he neared, waiting for him to speak. "If you're looking to swim it, I'd advise against that." His voice was slightly gravely, but it came out clear and concise. If a bit condescending, but all older people were like that. How come? The idea had already been shot down, but it didn't hurt to fish for information. "A few brash idiots tried it," the man huffed. "Didn't even make it a quarter of the way before they were pulled under. Watched it happen myself." Jackson muttered. "The current doesn't look that strong so close to shore." Not even a quarter of the way was only a few hundred feet from shore, and Hendrix had to agree with Jackson. While the water moved quickly, they had enough stats to power through. Base humans wouldn't stand a chance, but they were much more powerful than that. The man heard Jackson, which spoke of a higher perception than expected. "It's not the water you've got to worry about. It's what lurks underneath." The group all looked at each other suspiciously. They'd traveled through areas with much higher mana density than where they currently were, which made them hesitant to believe the man's words. The haunted woods were much worse than anything the river held. Sure, for the old man, the beasts would be difficult, but not for someone like Hendrix. He'd gained over 90 levels in his class fighting up the east coast. A paltry river beast wasn't enough to stop him. "I seen that look before. You don't believe me. No one believes me. They all think I'm just an old man telling tall tales. That is until they go under and never come back up. Mark my words, you will not make it across." The man said. "Digging deeper?" Jackson asked. "Then how do people do it?" "They don't." The man laughed. "At least not here they don't." That didn't make any sense. There had to be a way to cross. Enough time had passed for that much at least. If not a bridge, a boat or raft of some kind. "You can't be serious? All this time and there still isn't a way to cross?" Gonzalez said. "Not a safe one." The old man said. "Boats get gobbled up by the beasties. Rafts can't handle the current. Swimming's a fool's dream, and flying doesn't work either." "Flying?" Hendrix couldn't help but ask. All their testing and research back in the new capital aiming to rework planes hadn't borne fruit. The engines had to be completely redesigned as the strict tolerances didn't work anymore. The mana made the forces involved wildly different, and the structural integrity failed within moments of the engine starting up, if it even did start. Fuel was another issue, but wouldn't matter until they had a working plane. Yeah, two idiot brothers thought they could paraglide across if they got a high enough start, climbed into a hot air balloon using fire magic, and jumped out with their gliders. The old man recounted like it was an everyday occurrence and not something seen in a cartoon. The idea was out of the box, but it sounded like it would work. A high enough elevation and the crossing would be guaranteed. What happened to them? Just because most of the threats are waterbound doesn't mean all of them are. Dragonflies and mayflies the size of my head ate them alive. One tried to drop into the river to escape only to be eaten by a different beast. Not for the first time, Hendrix had to wonder what the world had come to. Men being eaten alive by mayflies of all things sounded asinine. Yet he doubted the old man was lying. Something like that was a large enough spectacle that asking around would confirm the story. Well, shit. They were still a few months away from the countdown reaching 0, but he still had to send word back to the admiral. If they didn't cross soon, it wouldn't reach the coast in time. Jayla. She hated traveling. Even before magic came and endurance made the trip tolerable, Jayla hated it. She got road sick in cars, motion sick on trains, and whatever kind of sick you got on planes. Anything other than walking with her own 2 feet was an annoyance at best. Boats were by far the worst, but luckily their entire journey was over land. The first leg of her journey was coming to a close as the smoke-spewing mountain was already in view. An active volcano wouldn't be the first spot she would choose to settle, but Travis was an idiot. The fact her city relied on them for trade rankled her. Being forced to play nice with Travis of all people was enough for her to scream. While she stood by the fact building on the slopes of a volcano was a monumentally stupid idea, it was useful for something. Minerals were abundant. Iron, copper, tin, and any and all common enough metals could be found and extracted. It was ludicrously expensive in terms of effort required, but the sheer amount more than made up for it. The refining capabilities of Travis's city more than tripled what hers could pull out of her own mountain. Mining was slower but much less prone to erratic eruptions. Her army followed behind her as she marched towards the mountain. The scenery was something to be admired if one cared for that type of thing. Jayla didn't, which made the miles of greenery and forest no different than all the others they had passed through. Even if the elevation gave the eye a lot more of it to see. The once national park was just another tree-filled forest to travel through. As they approached, she could feel the stone growing stronger underneath her feet. The mountain here was old, and it was invigorating to walk upon, even if it had a taint of fire that she found distasteful. The smell was another mark against the city, as the sulfuric and smoky air was hard to ignore. The walls came into view a quarter of the way up the summit from what she could tell, and she had to begrudgingly admit they were solid work. The stone was merged with near-seamless joints and driven deep into the ground for stability. It was nearly up to her own wall standards, which was something she took pride in and helped build herself. A small smile played at her face as she looked over the stonework but fully disappeared when the gates rumbled open. Tavis stood smiling with open arms as she walked toward the gate. "Jayla, you look as beautiful as ever." Travis beamed as he looked over her entourage. His eyes kept coming back to her more often than she liked. "Travis," she said gruffly in greeting. "Don't worry. I've prepared the finest room for you to stay in and rest. The trip must have been long and tiring," he said and guided her into the city. She wanted to snap back. Of course it was, but held back. He had made the journey himself and knew exactly how long it was. Instead, she allowed herself to be guided and followed behind. As they walked, she took in the city around her. It had grown since the last time she was here, nearly as much as her own city had. Temporary shelters and makeshift buildings became permanent, multi-story stone structures. The roads were planned and flattened out, and the steps the city carved into the mountain face were quality work. Tiered cities were a must when working with such uneven terrain. Even though she stipulated that Travis was an idiot, he had the brains to delegate the city planning to someone who had one. Other than the city's growth, Travis had grown as well. His fiery explosiveness mixed with steadfast stone aura was meshed neatly together instead of the choppy pieces it used to be. If what she expected were true, he was close to upgrading his affinity. The flow was still missing, but he was getting close enough to lava that it wouldn't be long now. The man himself still looked the same. Flowing, coal-black hair that came down to shoulder level extended into a perfectly manicured beard only a few inches long of the same color. His back and arms showed a man experienced with hard labor while still holding an explosiveness deep inside. While his clothes did their best to cover it up, it was obvious that underneath the flowing layers of cloth, he was wrapped in muscle. If he were less Travis, she may have found him charming. I recently had the perfect sauna built not too long ago that would be perfect to melt away the travel fatigue. If you want, I can even join you for a soak. He turned and offered with a blinding smile showing pearly white teeth. Yep, he hasn't changed. It only took a firm look for her to answer that. While a sauna sounded wonderful, she would rather cut off an arm than do so with him. The less time she had to spend in his presence, the better. Chapter 250 Dominance. Chris. I wasn't sure whether to call it progress or not that my mother didn't ask any questions about my request. I'd spent a month training, sparring, and fighting with the guard orders while also doing my daily trips into the dungeons, and now that the time was coming to depart, there were a few last things to do. One was to upgrade my body as the chamber was ready and waiting, and the other was to increase my wind law to Tier 2 finally. My wind law had been set aside for a while to focus on everything else I needed to focus on, and it was now time to fix that. I wanted to get my laws back to even before I went through the body of stone refinement. Partially because a phantom voice in my mind was trying to delay the pain the refinement would cause, and partially because I felt having my laws equal for the procedure would make it easier. Like the first one, I was continuing down the path of the northern wind's body, which was one of wind and ice. I felt it was still one of my best options, not that I had any different ones, but I had looked over a few other ones in the rewards and this was one I wished to stick to for now. Other than the obvious, increasing my affinity to both ice and wind, the main reason was the higher defense to slashing attacks. Our city had grown leaps and bounds as refugees flooded in along with the fort. In total, there were over 15,000 people between our two cities and nearly all of them used a slashing weapon of some kind. Those who used weapons, of course. Daggers were a mix of thrust and slash, and so were swords, but nearly every weapon people used was meant to cut in some way, and my technique guarded against that. Hammers, maces, and clubs were still used, just disproportionately less than bladed weapons, which I found odd, but not one to complain. It made preparing against them easier. In order to push my wind law to the next tier, I did the same thing I did to get it in the first place. Asked everyone I knew with a wind law to attack me. Well, not everyone, as that would be complete overkill, but a select few that had ones that aligned with what I was going for. The concepts behind laws being similar helped tremendously, which was where my mother came in. She had upgraded her law into an even more devastating form than before. She'd gained her law on the concept of ripping and tearing that wind could do, making her wind blades penetrate further and do more damage. She then extended that into razor-sharp cutting to push it into Tier 2, both times focusing on the sheer damage output. If she had to go all out, she turned into a small tornado of razor-sharp wind blades that diced up anything that got close. Watching her train against the dungeons was one of the scarier things I'd witnessed. Watching my mother, the loving woman who birthed and raised me, turn into a windstorm of blades with blood and chunks of body parts flying everywhere was something. When I asked her to hit me with her best shot, much like I had before, she didn't hesitate or ask any questions. All she said was, "Where do you want to do it?" It felt like she would have unleashed everything she had then and there if I asked her to. It was a far cry from how the first time she reacted. It was somewhat odd to compare the two. Not yet 2 years apart, yet the reactions were so different. Other than gathering my mother, I also grabbed Hal for the project. His wind law had similarly reached Tier 2 not that long ago and was close to the concept I was going for. His Tier 1 was gained on rotation and drilling to mix with his arrows, while his Tier 2 was gained on penetration. I didn't care for the first part, but penetration was close enough to what I was going for. I had gained my own wind law on nearly the same concept. He wanted his winds to penetrate further, while I wanted my winds to cause my cold to penetrate further. For my Tier 2, I wanted more power. I'd gained the inspiration from my trip to the Arctic and had tried to gain it there, but it wasn't meant to be. I wasn't completely sure, but if my mind hadn't been focused on something else, I thought I would have gained it then and there. Being so focused on my mana heart and bloodline had distracted me from clearing my mind enough to realize a deeper wind law. Or that was what I was telling myself. There were enough law-backed snowstorms I either ran through or detoured around that the wind law I was going for was prominent in my mind. The feeling, pressure, and the combination of ice and wind that the snowstorms had were the exact feeling I was going for. It helped to have a base to build off of, yet no matter how much extra time I spent thinking about it or meditating, I couldn't upgrade it. The feeling of being so close for so long was aggravating. Aggravating wasn't a strong enough word to describe it. It was agonizing some days. To fix that, my idea was to put myself under pressure. To have a host of people smothering me in wind law attacks so it would help stimulate what I was going for and push me over the edge. I should work on the wording. Jokes aside, I was sick of the feeling, and today was the day I would achieve it. Finding a clearing outside the gates was easy enough. All we had to do was get far enough away from the fields and it was fine. The trees would take a hit, but that was all right. Magic did wondrous things. It both made the trees stronger, or if they were blown down, regrow much faster. Abigail had future plans to clear them anyway, and we'd be doing her job for her. The people needed food, and that meant more farms. All right, I won't be using any skills to defend myself, so start off slow, I called out to the small crowd. I feared Hal and my mother weren't enough on my own and gathered a few more people who had wind laws. Not all of them were Tier 2, but that was fine. When I call for more, take it up a notch. I readied myself. Being bare-chested wasn't my first choice, but I didn't want to ruin a good shirt. Plus, I wanted to feel the winds hit my body, not feel them break on my armor. That was also why I wasn't using any skills. Jotun's resistance would make fighting off the attacks trivial, which was the opposite of what I wanted. The one thing I did do was anchor myself to the ground. With the combined winds of nearly a dozen people, there was a high chance of getting blown off my feet, especially if I didn't defend myself. A gentle application of some frost to my boots and the surrounding dirt was enough to keep that from happening. Begin, I called once I was ready. Some were more hesitant than others, but they all launched their various attacks down on me. It was clear that some were wary of attacking me while I was undefended, but they would soon take a different stance. My mother's wind blades and Hal's wind-enhanced arrows hit the hardest, but all the attacks launched broke against my chest with ease. Come on, you can do better than that. I barely felt that. It wasn't my goal to antagonize them, but by the looks I was getting, that was exactly what I did. The next round was decidedly stronger, and not by a small margin. I wasn't lying when I said I barely felt it. My fortitude was strong enough and my body was specifically refined to defend against the attacks I was under. Half-hearted attacks, even a dozen of them, weren't enough to harm me. More, I called over the growing winds. The next blast was a lot more forceful and I had to dig my feet in a bit more, but did little else. Those with Tier 1 laws go all out. I initially wasn't sure how tough my body was, my bare body, but it was hard not to smile at direct proof. It wasn't often that I got to test it. Whenever I fought, I usually wore my armor or used frost armor. If it wasn't that, I used Jotun's resistance. Even before gaining the legendary skill, reinforced body or fortified body were a staple in my build. The wall of wind that crashed over me next was the strongest yet, but it still wasn't enough. I could feel it trying to dig into my skin and cut me, but it wasn't enough. More, I called. A veritable typhoon was launched at me. Now we're getting somewhere. 2 attacks stood out from the rest. They dug deeper and pushed further, but they still weren't enough to get past my fortitude. More. The various Tier 1 laws started to mix together and the winds grew with every passing volley, but now there was something more in the mix. The Tier 2 laws. Only a portion of the attacks I felt wash over me had that kind of power behind them, but they dwarfed all the rest. The step between Tier 1 and 2 was a large one. I'd felt it myself with my ice law. More. The pressure built again and I could feel it. The picture of what I was going for was in sight. Now I can begin. Power was a wide concept to gain insight into. It meant different things to different people. The power of wind that Hal was going for was different than mine, and subsequently, mine was different than my mother's. The power I wanted craved, was something I'd seen happen 27 times before. I'd lived through 27 winters, and every time they came, they pushed everything out. Cold, Arctic winds came from the north and pushed everything else away. And that was what I was going for. Not just power, but dominance. While I had a plethora of ice skills, the ones I had using wind were lacking. Only one skill came to mind: Desolate Blizzard. But that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want the skill to do the work, I wanted my law to do it. I'd practiced my wind manipulation countless times, and while it would never be as good as my ice, especially without the skill for it, that didn't mean I was untrained. Similar to how I launched unstructured magic at the demon, I did the same now. Leveraging my law and ability to manipulate winds, I pushed back. It burned through my mana, but I had enough to spare now. My heart pumped it out at a pace my manual manipulation could barely keep up with. Being backed by my Arctic mana, what I conjured carried an inherent chill with it, but that was even better. It wasn't my goal to separate one from the other. I eventually wished to combine them. No one was sure how that worked or what that looked like, but that was above what I was trying to do, and I had to rein in my errant thoughts. Don't think ahead when you don't even have the building blocks. Refocusing, I pushed harder. Seeing I was pushed back, I didn't even have to call out for more. They knew what I needed. The pressure began to build, and my smile widened. This was exactly what I was going for. My winds are stronger and push all others out. Just like Boreas, I need the northern winds to reign supreme. I wasn't sure if calling on Greek mythology and the idea of Boreas would work or not, but I felt no harm in comparing the two. With the force of me pushing back against the attacks, they began to get diverted around me, and I had to grit my teeth. I didn't want to divert them, I wanted to dominate them. Spreading out my mana, I dug deeper. I created a wall in front of me so the winds couldn't be diverted. It added to the pressure and threatened to send me tumbling back, but I pressed through. My mind felt like it was on fire. I didn't have the wind manipulation skill to take up some of the burden, and it fell all on my mind, but I pushed through. I activated Mental Freeze to alleviate some of the burn, even though that wasn't what it was made for. It carried Arctic mana to my brain, and that was enough. I debated calling on my bloodline, but stopped myself. Similar to not wanting to rely on a skill, I didn't want to rely on my bloodline either. One of Hal's arrows threatened to break through, but I rallied back in time to keep it from happening. Every time I tried to gain ground, the others pushed harder to keep it from happening. With a roar and a mental shove, I gave it my all, and I felt the difference. Fell into place, and I knew I did it. All at once my resistance dropped, and I got a blast to the face that sent me flying. I didn't think that through. End of chapter 250.